Hi there, it's Suzanne Wagner, and welcome to the Astrology and the Numerology for April 23rd, 2020. If you add all of those numbers together, you get a 13. If you add the 1 and the 3 together, you get a 4. Now, the 4 is the number of neutral mind. It's the number of harmony and balance and win-win and cooperation. It's a high-level communication number. So this is a day when you want to really focus on communication and being as peaceful and neutral as you possibly can. Now, my joke about the number 4 is that the moment I start trying to work on being neutral, then I get all the not neutral people trying to talk to me. So kind of just know that you can attract in chaos because you're focusing on something else and you're trying to be more stable and more neutral. So really listen to yourself and listen to others and, don't respond. I know that that's really hard, but I think that if you let people roll and let them talk, they will actually self-correct unless they're looping. And then I think it's perfectly okay to remind them that they're looping. But this number, neutrality, could be a real challenge right now. And neutrality is not easy in any circumstance. And under these stressful conditions in the world, it might be harder again still, but it's still something to strive for. So while I cannot control the world, I can control myself. And the world is sort of spinning out of control to find a new place of balance and clarity. And that balance is going to take at least a decade. So we have to survive this in the meantime. Calmness is essential in great times of turmoil and upset. Keeping a clear head becomes imperative in these times and in the upcoming future. You have to be open to very new ways of moving and flowing with an ever-changing world. Having a knee-jerk reaction or a temper tantrum is not only going to keep you stressed out and exhausted, but it's going to make everyone around you stressed out and exhausted. So cultivate a center and teach the mind to remain in a neutral state of heightened awareness. Remember, the mind is supposed to be a slave to the soul, not the other way around. So you can be awake and aware of what is happening in the world and still be informed and educated so that you can make appropriate choices for yourself and your family. Besides, your children are going to appreciate a parent that maintains sanity in such an insane time in history. Sometimes you have to be calm to help others. I notice for myself that when I'm around other people, it almost forces me to stay a little bit calmer, and their upset and stress causes me to drop into a deeper place. Maybe that'll work for you too. So calmness can be positively infectious for others, and you can change another's state with your own energetic state. So give it a try. The astrology today. The moon is in Taurus, and it likes comfort and ease and flow and sensuality, and it wants to aid those who need it the most, but it does conjunct Uranus and Taurus. So while one part wants that inner balance to be reasonable and comforting, the other part seeks out the bizarre and the unusual, and it attracts the strange and the unexpected. Not that we need any more of that right now. But Uranus is clearly just getting started in Taurus because it's going to be there until 2027. And many of the old ways of doing things that gave us comfort are going to be gone and radically change. And our priorities are going to show us how self-involved we have been for decades. Perhaps it's a good thing. I can feel that need for some change driving us forward into a much more conscious place. And while some will resist and cause terrible damage, the horror of their actions and choices will cement in stone the desperate need globally for a very new way and a very new world. The energy will slow down as the day continues, yay, and allow yourself to drop into that new place because you might need a little bit of a rest. My suggestion is to get as much done as you can over the next few weeks, because then we are going to start a retrograde season like none that you've ever seen in a very long time, and with it are going to be some intense eclipses. And so once those retrogrades start happening and the eclipses start happening, you're going to be in a major cycle of review and reflection, and not a lot's going to get done because people are going to tend to panic. So those out there that are feeling the need to break out of the shelter-in-place orders are going to hit up against their own issues of fear and isolation. And I know that we're human beings, and I know that humanity craves contact with others, but we sometimes use it as a distraction because we don't know how to just sit and be with what we are feeling. And those that have so much inner anger and want to be angry at somebody or something and blame somebody or something, they are not comfortable with inside themselves their own anger. And that anger becomes a driving force behind their insatiable need to go against the stay in place orders. There are others that face financial ruin, and they are trying to choose to not stay in place because they have to choose between eating and working, and that's a horrible decision to have to make too. So for some, facing the anger and hatred they hold inside has become intolerable, and facing the fear and resentment that they have not addressed is eating away at them, and they need someone or something to blame. The good news is that there are no restrictions on being creative, and there are no restrictions on being inventive and letting your imagination manifest something very new and different. And you are in a very unusual moment to reach past the known and into a place where you can take a very bad moment and make something beautiful out of it. So let's try that. So my quote for today is, never let another's fear dictate your next choices. Never believe someone whose mind cannot be still. Never put trust in a person who is a walking bag of biases. Intelligence is not gauged by how much you know. It is gauged by how you use what you know in a way that allows you to have the deepest compassion possible. All right, back to story time. I'm switching story time from Peru to Berlin. So when I was 17 to 21, I lived in Berlin, Germany, and the wall was up, and it was the time during the squatters' riots, and there was a lot of conflict that was happening on the border, and NATO had pointed nuclear weapons at Russia during the Cold War, and it was a tense time, and Berlin was not the Berlin that we see today, and it was a very compressed, angry sort of place. So when I was a dancer in Berlin, I had multiple experiences with ghosts in that city in my apartment. Berlin was, of course, destroyed by 2 world wars, and World War II devastated the city, and most of it was in ruins after the war, and millions died in those attacks and bombings that the Allied forces did. And so it's no wonder that some ghosts might be lingering. First, I want to say that getting an apartment in Berlin in the late 1970s was very difficult because of the squatters' riots that were happening at the time. After World War II, there were no men in Germany, and so the Germans had to import many Turkish men to help remove the rubble and rebuild. And eventually those men brought their families, but the biases of World War II die hard. And so there were entire families living in one room because the Germans would not rent to them. So the pressure for housing was atrocious for many years, and many resented the influx of the foreigners that were in Berlin because there was already a housing shortage. As a result, I lived in St. Hildegard's Krankenhaus, the hospital, for 5 months in the nunnery with the nuns. And while they were absolutely wonderful to me, I did not want to live in a nunnery forever. And so finally, I had heard from a friend of mine that there was a very, very small apartment that was right across from the theater on the 9th floor of a building. And one of the dancers lived in a much bigger unit next door. There was only one problem. The renter of that unit had been a very old man who had died in the unit, and his ex-wife was in charge of renting it out and getting rid of all the stuff. So for 500 Deutschmarks at the time, which was very cheap, I got a furnished apartment with utensils, pots, pans, furniture, etc. And it was a great deal, and I took it. Now, I will say here that even though I definitely saw ghosts from World War II, I never saw the past renter of that apartment. So this old man had clearly gone to the other side, and for that, I was very grateful. This apartment was very small. In German system, it was called 21 quadrat meters, which is the size of a small bedroom. There was room for a twin bed and a nightstand, a corner table and chairs that sat 2 people, a built-in kitchenette with a very small refrigerator and a 2-burner stove, and a bathroom. I must say that I realized living there how little you really need to survive. A few pots and pans, plates, forks, knives, spoons, a bowl, and you are good. Meals were not complicated, and I ate my main meal at the theater cantina each day because they had great food. But then that's when all the stuff started. I would wake up in the middle of the night, and randomly there would be a dead person sitting in one of my 2 chairs, usually staring blankly out, not ever looking at me personally. The problem was that they all had injuries consistent with a building falling down on them. They had crushed heads, missing limbs, clearly distorted bodies that were traumatized. It was like they were hollow, waiting, not sure that they were even dead. They were frozen in time and place that still existed in their world, but not in this world. Now, they were never threatening to me. They were sort of vacuous, empty. Part of some part of their soul was somewhere else. I would sit up and talk to them, but they never seemed to notice me. It was as if they were caught in limbo of another world, time, and place. Only one time did something odd happen, and I started noticing that leotards were disappearing. Now, that is very strange because I did all my own laundry in my tub. I had a machine that you placed in the tub and filled it with tub water and plugged it in, and it would wash and agitate your clothes. And so my bathroom constantly looked like leotard and tight store most of the time. So these clothes could not go anywhere other than the theater or my apartment. And I would clearly remember washing them, folding them up, and putting them away because there was very limited space. But the next day, they would be gone. And I also began noticing that I was exhausted each morning, and I mean like really exhausted, like sore muscles, fatigued back. I felt like I had been dancing all night. It all started at the same time that the leotards began disappearing. And that's when I noticed a dwarf in my house, or a dead, smaller than normal person that was clearly attached to me in some way in my house. And I could have a conversation with him. It seemed that in the old theater days, they used dwarves up in the rafters that would stand on the scene booms and the backdrops that would come down when the scene changed in the theaters. That the dwarves would stand up there holding on to the rope, and they would be lifted up because they were so light, and they would unhook the painted scene that would then drop down. And he had been one of them. And he loved dancers and was always infatuated with the dancers. Before he died, he dreamed of dancing with one of the dancers, and somehow that's how he got attached to me. He was taking my astral self dancing as I was sleeping. I explained to him that this was not okay, as he was exhausting me. But he repeatedly said over and over again, as if in a loop, "But I love you, but I love you, but I love you." And I told him that was very kind of him, but that I was alive and that he was dead, and he needed to move forward into the light. It took many tries, but I finally got him to agree, and he walked into the light and was finally gone. He never returned, and later all of the leotards were returned and sitting on my dresser folded all at once, and some of them had been missing for weeks, and it made me realize that some spirits can shift things out of this reality and into theirs. And I have other stories about that too that I will tell you at another time. So anyway, thanks everyone for listening. I hope you are taking care of yourself and staying in place and staying healthy. And I am frantically, busily working in my garden, and it's amazing how much work there is to do. And so I'm keeping myself busy also. Thanks.